Hello guys and welcome back to ArxangelRC. Yes, my review of the now not so new anymore ZOHD Talon GT Rebel is finally here, and I do have to apologize it took so long. But between preparations for a new project and some really crappy weather, it was really difficult to find the time to do enough flights so I can properly test the plane in its entire flight envelope. But having done all that I need for now, let's get down to it. The Talon GT Rebel comes in continuation to ZOHD's Mark II series of planes and as a successor to the famed Nano Talon model, only with a slightly longer wingspan and noticeably more space on the inside. Being a Mark II model, it shares quite a few design features with the Dart XL plane. The squarish design, the blunt nose and the more aggressive overall look, just to name a few. I know a lot of people are not fans of the whole nose job on the Mark II planes so far, but regardless of aerodynamic arguments, I am willing to argue that these are some of the best designed FPV planes out there, and in big part because of the nose. Back in the day before ZOHD came out with these, I remember the horror I felt every time I'd get a new plane and I'd look at it and realize I'm going to have to start cutting and hacking and gluing and printing and so on just so I can fit a camera or two in the nose, which resulted in much uglier looking planes with not much more aerodynamic properties than these. Difference is, somebody actually thought about this beforehand so that when it arrives here I just effortlessly slide one or two cameras in the nose with the provided hardware and go about my day rather than spend half a day modding and cutting up a brand new plane. That alone to me is worth a lot, and I would like to thank ZOHD for doing it. I built a lot of planes and I can certainly appreciate a time and effort saving design decision such as this one. It is one thing to have one or two planes and only fiddle with them from time to time, and quite another when you are building a new plane from the ground up every week, and a different one at that. But anyway, let's get back on track. In addition to more space inside the plane, the tail section has been reworked completely to make it sturdier, and yet it can still be removed in seconds to put the plane back in its original box for transport. The wings are now flat, so there is no need to mod that, and just to see that ZOHD have been listening, since a lot of people complain that the nose section of the Dart XL needs to be reinforced, the Talon GT now comes with carbon strips on both sides of the fuselage running from the nose to the tail, which should make it a good deal sturdier. In addition, and this is something that I have been in love with since my ex-UAV clouds, the underside comes covered with a plastic piece, which is an absolutely paramount thing to have on every foam plane doing belly landings. Costs next to nothing to make, does a lot of good. Really not sure why more manufacturers aren't doing it, but I'm glad ZOHD are actually listening. Now, there is one piece on this plane that is questionable, and that would be the downward facing tail fins, because seeing how close they are to the ground makes you wonder exactly how long they would stay attached there while doing belly landings. In fact, proper landings on a good surface would be okay, but landing on anything other than a smooth surface would result in them flying off of the plane. But the reason they are there is to give more authority and stability to the tail by providing more surface area. The plane should really come with a pack of 10 of these, not just the 2. Another criticism of the Mark II ZOHD models has been the brittle foam, but I'll dive into this later on, so make sure you watch till the end. Right now, what I can do is get all the gear I want in the plane and get it flying. I'm not going to go into too much detail about the autopilot install in this video. There will be a separate detailed video about this specifically, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. What I can say is that the Talon GT was quickly outfitted with an F4 Pro board, the MyFly Dream antenna tracking board, a power distribution board with filtered outputs to power the video system, and 2 cameras, a RunCam Swift 2 for me to look through and a RunCam 3S for the HD recording. Since pretty much everything on this model comes pre-assembled and glued in the factory, there is very little to do other than put the pieces together and tighten the nuts, charge the battery and head to the flying field. Now, the Talon GT does have CG markings on the wings, and for the maiden I will be balancing it based on those points just to be safe, although they do look like they're a tad further forward than usual, but I guess we will know soon enough. Doing last pre-flight checks of control surfaces and autopilot stabilization direction, two very important things to do before every flight. And the plane was ready for takeoff. A quick toss and it was in the air. Stock motor and prop have a surprising amount of thrust after doing some necessary elevator and aileron trimming. Turns out this plane can do verticals without any issue at its current weight, which brought on some aerobatics, and I was quite pleasantly surprised how nimble and agile it was and how well it flew even in full manual mode. The day was quite turbulent and windy, hence why I picked it for the maiden, and the Talon GT did not disappoint. Naturally, my next order of business was to test the stall behavior, and it was pretty uneventful. It would dip a little to one side and then right itself when it picks up a little speed. Absolutely refused to go into a dip stall, and for me that is a huge trust gain for any plane, because I know I won't have to think about this when I go cloud chasing at higher altitudes and longer distances. I then flipped into a stabilized mode to check stall behavior with the autopilot running, and it was even more boring. So with all that thrust at my disposal and the big capacity 4S2P lithium ion pack, in just a few minutes the Talon GT found itself over the top of the mountain, poking its nose into some clouds. And keep in mind, this was still its maiden flight. I can honestly say I've never done something like this on a maiden flight, but here it is nonetheless. All spring I've been eyeing those clouds hanging over the mountain like that, taunting me, and there was always some other work to attend to and I couldn't go flying, but right now I wasn't going to waste it. Throttled up and the Talon shot itself into the clouds at an impressive climb rate. It reached up there in no time, and those were over 10 kilometers away and over 2 kilometers high. So I was well over the peak of the mountain as well. It was thrilling for sure, and I was quite happy with the performance of the plane, and knowing it will not dip stall on me was quite reassuring. Normally, I would say don't do this at home, folks, at least not on the maiden flight, but I had gone over the plane while assembling it and it was put together properly in the factory, and since I've done this exact autopilot install and setup for the 100,000th time already, I was pretty certain of what to expect, and it delivered. Was quite happy to see the plane flying so well on the stock PIDs, although the roll axis could use a bit of tuning, as it does like to get overexcited every now and again under certain circumstances. And then it came time to land, and yes, this one, at least at the stock CG points, does need some speed, just like the Dart XL, so it can land properly and not nose in just before that or drop like a brick from the sky. So, just before landing, I noticed the motor was giving off a very weird sound, and after landing, guess what? Some magnets had come loose inside the bell. Turns out there are a few defective units from this batch. ZOHD already know about it, and a few other reviewers had suffered the same, but no harm done. I've got other spare motors, something will surely fit. Oh, and I also managed to break the underfins on an unplanned landing later on when I ran out of battery just as I was making the landing approach and had to land in some tall grass. Gluing this was quick and easy, but the breaking part was quite expected and only a matter of time. Now, I went ahead and replaced the motor with an SK3 one that I had, and also mounted an APC 8x8 Sport prop, as I thought it is the lightest in that size that I currently have. Was also quite curious what the performance will be with this motor. I also reattached the glued underfins, and first chance I got, I went back to the flying field. At some point during the week, I did talk to Bruce from RC Model Reviews, and he did mention he moved the CG point about a centimeter to the rear on his model, so I decided to also try it out, and it did end up flying a lot better. This day the clouds were hanging over the mountain again, so the end goal was clear. But on its way there, the plane had a special mission to run, as it is my custom of late. Auto takeoff was nice and easy and uneventful, and the plane completed the mission with admirable ease and a pretty darn impressive cruising speed. I guess this new prop really did make a difference. Also made it very hard to chase down with the Phantom later on for those aerial shots. I had to give it to a friend to fly it and asked him to slow it down as much as he can, and thankfully it flies pretty well and stable around 50 kilometers an hour, so I was able to get some shots in, but more on that later. Right now I was already shooting for the clouds, and this day they turned out to be a bit higher, like a bit over a kilometer higher. So at some point I ended up at 3.6 kilometers above the takeoff location and just over the clouds, and oh boy, what a sight. I absolutely love looking at that scenery. It just never gets old when you're flying up there, but still staying firmly planted on the ground. The plane is as smooth as ever, and this beauty just opens up in front of your eyes. Absolutely stunning every time. However, at some point I realized the clouds were behind me and I was coming up on 15 kilometers with the measly R9mm receiver with its stock non-T antenna running 200 milliwatts on the ground, and still had some good deal of RSSI left, so I was certain I can get out to at least 20 kilometers, but decided to have some fun around the clouds and leave this test for another day. On the way back I decided to do some high-speed testing, so throttled up with a bit of down elevator, and soon enough I saw 159 kilometers per hour on my OSD, and yet the plane remained as smooth as ever and had control, which is important at these speeds. It is absolutely shocking to me how this plane easily cruises around 60 to 90 kilometers an hour depending on the wind. It is just effortless. Makes it hard to chase around with a Phantom, but does eat up the kilometers quite quickly. And so I gave myself to a calming cruise around the clouds, and it was awesome. Although the slight shakes from time to time did remind me that I do not have a gimbaled camera on the plane, so they will be present even on the HD recording. It wasn't anything shocking, but enough to slightly break the bliss I was getting into. But you know, it is a 1 meter wingspan model after all, and besides, the DJI Osmo action camera that I have coming my way might just solve these issues soon enough. Interesting fact, I did pretty much the same flight with the Dart XL immediately after I, let's say, landed the Talon. Only difference is the Dart has the stock motor with an APC 8x6 pusher prop, and I have to say it felt noticeably less willing to gain altitude compared to what the Talon did just over an hour ago. It took way longer to get up there into those altitudes and into the clouds, although since it is running the same radio and video transmitter, range performance was pretty much on par despite the atrocious placement of the R9mm antenna. I did have some issues with interference messing up my OSD, but getting to and over the mountain has now become like a walk in the park and proving grounds for pretty much every new FPV model, so I do know my way around there and know the scenery, so even without a home arrow, I do have a pretty good idea where to return to. But back to the important question. Yes, from these two flights, I did feel like the Talon GT was the better and more stable plane and had a higher cruise speed, felt like it is gliding easier through the air, and even with the stock motor, which was supposed to be like the one on the Dart, it had noticeably more power and its climb rate is better. It would seem ZOHD have indeed learned something and are improving and optimizing the new models. Fingers crossed this trend would continue. So, having gotten my fill of cloud surfing, I headed back, and just as I was about to land the Talon, it sort of lost its grip and nosed in a bit earlier than anticipated. Now, the nose being of the kind that bites, not the one that slides, it took a good chunk of earth and grass and managed to break off. And this created the perfect conditions for me to get into the foam talk about these models. This is the first time I actually damage a ZOHD plane, so don't blame me for not doing it sooner. I'm actually glad it has taken this long. Back in the day, I used to crash a plane every time I'm out flying, every flight even. Used to go out with 10 models in the boot of my car just to make sure I'd have enough to last a day. I have crashed a lot, guys. Some of you wouldn't even believe it. There is at least one city apartment worth of destroyed equipment and models in these here fields by yours truly, and that's a fact. At some point I even thought this was never going to end, but luckily it did end, and now I crash planes very rarely, though granted I rarely fly close to the ground anymore, so it might have something to do with that. Altitude is your friend, and this is yet another example of that. But anyway, my first observation was that it was a very clean break with no wrinkles, which instantly meant an easier and better looking repair job, although the glue I'll be using would certainly make a mess of it, but at least I know it will be very strong. Also, the Talon GT is the first plane that I see coming out of the factory with carbon strips running through the whole fuselage from nose to tail. You know, one more thing I wouldn't have to do myself, and even those were broken, so despite this happening from a low altitude at a relatively shallow angle, I guess it just hit the right spot to do all this damage, which is actually not as bad as it looks. We'll add a few more carbon strips in there for a good measure just to reinforce it, so it should end up even stronger. So, is the foam too fragile? Can't say for certain, to be honest. I would have expected a much nastier type of damage, and it would have been so had this plane been made out of regular EPO. It would have bent and wrinkled and would have required boiling and would look a mess even after the repair, or at least after my repair, because I can honestly say I've lost my patience for such stuff long ago, so kinda half-ass it nowadays, and this here looks like it will repair very well via half-assing. I did talk to ZOHD, and they told me they've done all sorts of lab tests on different materials, and for instance this material was 25% more elastic and could bear 40% more weight than regular EPP, just as an example, which is not something you can figure out by crashing it or by feeling like it is more fragile. I'm not saying lab testing can accurately predict real-world use, it is all a game of chance. Sometimes it will not break, like it has happened for me a few times, but this one time it will look harmless, but the angle and speed would be just right and it would hit it just in the right spot to cause more damage than you would think. And you could be left with the feeling that the plane is fragile. Not defending ZOHD by any measure, they have based their choice of material on hard laboratory data that is void of feelings and assumptions, but based on actual material comparisons and testing, which is still admirable because I urge you to find another of the hobby grade manufacturers that does this. I think we all know the answer to this one. Also, they are certainly not expecting me to say only good things about their models, quite the contrary. I am always encouraged to tell them what is wrong so they can learn, which is something that very few other companies in this industry have done. More to the point, despite what some may think, I have never given a positive review on something just because I've received it for free. I've always been as objective as I can be, but still keep in mind that I'm also speaking from my perspective, from my experiences with these models, so don't blame me if I have not had some of the problems other people have had. For that exact reason, I do not read or watch other people's reviews on stuff I'm about to review, so that I wouldn't go into the review biased in some way. I prefer to figure out the problems myself, and if some don't present themselves right away, they might further down the line or might be completely absent. In any case, you get my unfiltered and unbiased opinion, and it would always be based on my personal experience with the model, so take it or leave it. I couldn't care less if a John Smith on the other side of the planet crashes his on every landing and keeps yapping about how fragile it is and how aerodynamically wrong it is and how this and that is wrong with it. No, John. Nothing is wrong with it. The Talon GT flies unbelievably well, especially for a plane of this size. This is my personal opinion based on my experience with the plane so far. The solution for you would be simple. Know the limitations of your model. This is extremely important, guys. I can't stress it enough. Don't just fly safely in circles when you made a new plane. Take it up high and actually try to break it. Try to stall it. See what it does and how it behaves. This is how you get a feel for it. Look at your OSD data if you have it, so you can see at what speed it will start to stall, and remember those limitations because they would be different for every model. You can't expect one plane to fly like another just because you want it to and then complain that it is wrongly designed just because it doesn't fit into your idea of what it should be, which is much more likely to be the wrong thing. Well, John, it might be just that I know the limitations of my plane and fly it accordingly, like the fact that both the Dart XL and the Talon GT need more speed on landings. You can't slow them down as much as a trainer plane and expect a spot landing. That usually results in a torn off nose here. And it was the same before with the Dart XL and proximity flying. People were trying to use it for stuff it wasn't intended to do. Of course, it will not be agile enough for fast proximity if it is a long-range cruiser. Think, people, think. Should be easy. This was the first time I break a ZOHD model, and it was merely because of a lapse in my judgment. Should have throttled up just a bit more so I can get through the turn and would have landed safely. I am not afraid to admit I made a mistake. That is how we learn. These planes need their speed, and anything below 40 or 45 kilometers an hour, especially in a turn so low to the ground with the wind in your back, would almost certainly bite you in the rear. And again, just to make sure somebody will remember it, know the limitations of your models. Now, just in case you've actually survived through this video until this point, since it did turn out freakishly long, for which I am sorry, but it had to be done, you should be now well aware of my opinion on the Talon GT Rebel by now, and there is no point in me continuing to talk for much longer. Stay around as there will be more coming on a variety of topics, but until then, links for all items shown and used in this video can be found in the description below, and using any of them to buy literally anything from those websites would help support this channel, and you will have my eternal gratitude as that is my full-time job, and as such I can't really afford to be making fake reviews, just something the people criticizing can consider. Another way you can support me is Patreon. The link is also there, and I would like to really thank all the people who have supported me so far in any way and would continue to do so. If you have enjoyed this video and found it useful, please feel free to like, share and subscribe if you haven't already. And don't forget to also hit that bell button so you can be notified when I upload a new video. Also, consider following me on Facebook for more regular updates. Don't forget to land at speed, and I'll see you soon.